Yeah, but I'm Lindsay. I work for a company called Circassia on the Oxford Science Park. I've been working there for about 1.5 years now, and previous to that I was working at a customer service job at a lease car company, so a bit of a change from lease cars to pharmaceuticals, but to be honest it was worthwhile because I came in at a time of a lot of change, and it's helped me to bring a lot of things in which have actually made using Master Control a lot smoother at our company. So going to go through a bit of that with you, but first a bit of background on our company. So we were founded in 2006 and we were listed on the London Stock Exchange I think beginning of last year, so went through our IPO then. We're developing immunotherapies for allergy. We work on what's called an outsourced model, so we don't have any laboratories or we don't have any sites. We're just an office in Oxford, but we develop all of the core documents there, so all of our clinical protocols and things like that are written in-house. We have a lead candidate in phase 3 and 3 further in phase 2B, and we're fully funded to bring our main candidate to market. We've had a huge amount of growth within the company. I was actually number 21, I think, when I started, and that was off a period of several people starting around the same amount of time as me, and I think we're now around 65, so in 1.5 years it's been quite a lot of growth, and I think it's just going to continue growing, to be honest, expanding into different parts of the world. So in this picture you can see our main products. So the cat allergy one is the one that is in phase 3 at the moment. We've then got grass, house dust mite and a ragweed product. So we were a growing company, and originally we were using a paper-based system. This was on a document management system that the company had used originally for a number of years when it was very, very small. It wasn't necessarily going to be able to fulfill the needs that the company needed with more employees. So the main questions that were being asked were, oh God, sorry, clicker not working. The main questions that were being asked were, did our document management system have enough control of the documents to maintain consistency? So did we have version control in our system? Were people able to upload their own documents? Were they checking the documents before they were being uploaded? If we were bringing in lots of new employees, were they going to be able to find the documents that we had on our system? Was it an easy structure? Were those documents easily accessible, or was it going to require a large amount of training? Was the system we had at that time going to be able to fulfil the quality management system requirements placed on it by different areas of the business? So, for example, even just our change control process at that time was quite small because we were quite a small business. As more people came on, more changes, was that going to work in the current system we had? As you can imagine, we then decided to move to Master Control. That was something that was done by my boss just before I started. So I think they started the project early 2013, and it was pretty much completely finished by the September of that year. So it's just been the fine-tuning, to be honest, since then. All of the documents were migrated across. I think it was 30,000 documents in total, so it was even though quite a small company, quite a big job. And there was huge positives, even just initially following the migration, let alone once everything embedded in and people were able to use the system, that kind of thing. First one, better control of documents. So in the old system, there wasn't really any version control, there wasn't necessarily the control of people being able to upload certain areas of documents to different areas of the system. They used to be able to create their own folder structures, create their own structures within the system, which obviously is okay when there's only a few people in the company because they all know exactly what areas they're putting documents in. When there's 60 people in the company, you need a bit more control in that system. the original system wasn't a validated system. Moving to master control then meant we had a validated system. We had the documentation to go with that. So obviously if we were after that, we could produce that in inspection. Our documents were stored safely and securely. So the previous system was a cloud-based system. Our master control system, we're on a hosted environment, so our documents were now much more secure. We could make sure that we could get to them if we needed to. A lot of our documents have compulsory recording in their custom fields. So previously, as I said, people could just create their own folders, put the documents where they wanted. Now they had enforced custom field data. So, for example, if a document went with a clinical study, they had to record that study number so that it was easily findable later. And lots of other documents also had that compulsory recording. It just meant that things were done a lot more consistently. Our internal auditing was simplified. So previously, when the structures weren't quite so defined, internal auditing was quite difficult because you had to go and ask people where the documents were to actually be able to complete the audit. We have master control. There's a set system, a set way of storing the documents. So that internal auditing became a whole lot easier. It just meant the burden on QA was a lot less. We could give access to our system to regulatory inspectors. With the previous system, because it was a paper-based system that we were then using to store documents electronically on this old system, we couldn't necessarily give access to inspectors. With master control, we could just give them access to our system. They could review the documents electronically. We didn't have to be printing everything out in the back room. It was a lot less burden on QA for that particular area. So, as with anything, introducing master control was met by a little bit of resistance. I think, to be honest, it was inevitable. It's like with anything in life, people don't like change, and it's just managing that to an extent. Initially, it was quite complicated to see why people were having problems. There was a lot of complaining from some areas, but some of it wasn't particularly constructive because without knowing exactly what's wrong, it's hard to know what we needed to fix. So the main things that people were seen to be having issues with were problems finding documents. So they were going onto the system, doing a search and just not finding the document they wanted. A lack of understanding of the new system, I think, was a bit of an issue. So they didn't necessarily know how to do the searches properly. They didn't necessarily even know how to find the organisers, or if they had been told, they hadn't retained that information to be able to use it. Mislabelling of metadata. So as I said, we had 30,000 documents moved across. That was done in quite a short period of time, and inevitably there's going to be some human error in labelling those documents when they're moved across to the new system. There wasn't that much clarity from everyone about where this mislabelling was. So if we could get that, then we could try and find if there were trends of documents that had been mislabelled. It was more just, my documents aren't in the right place. Just general resistance to accepting the change. A lot of people really liked the old system they had, so it's difficult getting over how great the new system we had was and all the new things we could do with it if they were a bit stuck in, well, we liked our old system, we don't want a new one. There was a reduction of rights. So, as I said, in the previous system, people could create their own folder structures. They could essentially just do what they wanted. We stopped that. We had a document control team, which was me. When I first started, I was the one that uploaded most of the documents. The clinical documents were uploaded by a clinical team, but essentially those privileges were taken away from most of the company, which I think was potentially a bit of a shock because they were used to just being able to put their document on the system, whereas now they weren't allowed to do that. They were just allowed to literally download them, view them. We hadn't quite got to the point yet with electronic signatures, but they would have been able to sign things off. But it was mainly just, I think, that lack of being able to go and do exactly what they wanted in the system. As I said, this seemed to be quite anecdotal to start with because people were just saying these things. You'd have a meeting and they'd say, well, I can't find documents, I can't do this. It doesn't necessarily help us with being able to find solutions to those problems. There was some resistance in some people that was a lot more pronounced than others. I put this picture up because this is how I felt about halfway through last year. I think it can be quite easy to take that personally sometimes, but people do just need to vent. And I think one of the problems we had was new people were coming in and I would give them their master control training in the morning, and by the afternoon they had already decided that they didn't like master control. how can they not like Master Control when they've only had 3 hours experience on the system? It's because there are some people with quite a lot of negativity that are kind of letting that rub off onto other people. But I kept calm, because I think coming from a customer service background, it kind of helps you to say, they're not angry at me, I need to find what it is that's the problem. So, as I said, we had to find exactly where the issues were. So we put together a company-wide survey. The main topics we looked into were how often do you use the system and how intuitive do you find the system. We also looked at how easy is it to find documents, just to give us an idea around exactly where the problems were, whether or not it was something that was going to be an easy fix or not. We gave them a scoring system of 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. There was also an opportunity for people to leave comments if they wanted to, just so we could try and delve a bit deeper into what those problems were. And we basically collated all these results together to try and discover the cause of the negativity. In terms of weighting them, obviously, if we had really bad comments from people that were using the system every single day, then that was going to be more of the focus of our attention. Because if people are only using the system once a year and they're having issues, then really I can help them individually to use the system if there's a point that they need to sign off an SOP or some training or something like that. So, these were the results of the survey we did. The main ones we were looking at, I've bolded there. So actually, it turned out to be not as bad as we thought it would be. The main questions we were looking at, which were how intuitive do you find Master Control to use, and how easy is it to find documents in Master Control, actually came out with scores of nearly 3. So 3 out of 5, considering that the feedback we were getting from people was actually quite negative, seemed to conflict slightly, because actually on average people weren't having an awful time with the system. People hadn't all scored it 1, so there was something to work with. We did ask a few questions around how useful do you find the custom fields, just because we wanted to find if it was the way we'd originally configured the system that was causing people to have issues, or if it was more of a training problem. We did also ask questions around response time and the help, just because we thought that if it was more of a system issue that people just weren't telling us, then we needed to speak to the Master Control guys about that and sort that out. Or if it was a configuration issue, again, we needed to think about that separately. So these are some of the comments we had. My biggest concern is not knowing what information is available on Master Control, and therefore not knowing the correct search terms, etc. to use. So that's clearly someone that needs a bit more training. We need to show them how we set the system up. We need to show them how to find documents easier in the system. Documents have been incorrectly categorised. Now, as I said, originally this is something we thought probably happened, but without any more information, it's hard to know where these issues are, because there are so many documents in the system. Is it a particular document type? Is it a particular custom field that's been given incorrectly? We need to know more. I really struggle finding documents on Master Control. Again, probably looks like it's more of a training issue, because the people in QA that were using Master Control every day weren't struggling to find documents. So it's evident that it is possible to find the documents if you're using the system often, so maybe we just needed to concentrate our efforts, do a bit more training. So from this we identified our key areas of improvement. As I said, the survey supported our original conclusions that it was using the system and finding documents that seemed to be the issue, rather than the actual system itself, or it running slowly, or there being some sort of system problem. The quick fix was to provide further training. So we did do that, lots of training sessions, as I was talking about yesterday, pizza and sweets. Save searches implemented for frequently used documents, so people didn't have to remember, for example, SOP numbers or things like the quality policy. They didn't have to remember exactly where that was stored. It's just there in an easy-to-use search. And some of the feedback we had was that organisers would make things a lot easier for people, so more organisers, showing people where the organisers were, making them more accessible for people. Security configuration, because what we found was a lot of people, I think partly as a carryover from the previous system, had a lot of access. They could see a lot of documents because there wasn't any particular reason for them to not. But actually, someone working in manufacturing doesn't necessarily need to see the clinical documents, and it's just making their view more cluttered. They were seeing more documents in their searches than they probably needed to. So we stripped back some of those access rights and took the approach of it's best to keep it simple, and then we can build it up if people can't find things, then give people all the access, and then they're really struggling with hundreds of results in their search list. But it was difficult to make further improvements until we'd done the training and people had better understanding of the system. We also had quite a few new people coming into the company at the time, so that was obviously having an impact on that at the same time, because we needed to get them trained up and used to the kind of documents they were actually searching for before they had a real understanding of the system. So one of the things we did was set up further organisers. So initially when we installed the system, we actually had we did have a number of organisers, but they were quite broad. They broadly covered the documents we had. They were things like we had an organiser for SOPs, we had an organiser for clinical documents, we had an organiser for manufacturing documents, but not down to those specific levels, and some of them were quite complicated because that's what people had originally requested when the system was set up, probably because they didn't have enough knowledge of the system to know exactly what it was that they wanted in the first place. So the survey indicated that we needed more organisers, and that would really aid people to find documents because they're much more used to that folder structure. They can just click through and find things. The challenge with this, which was which documents would benefit from having the organisers, and what was the best way to set this up. I think probably going as simple as possible to start with and then adding more levels was going to help, but it was difficult to tell. So this is a screenshot of one of the original organisers we had. So we had a few that were the taxonomy ones based on our custom fields, and we had a few that were based on safe searches. So this is an example of our SOP organiser. So it's quite a broad organiser as people could get to all the SOPs. But they were saying they wanted more of these. So in an attempt to make things a little bit more straightforward for people, we set up new organisers. In some of the training sessions we ran to try and make things a bit easier, we tried to develop some of the ideas out of people of what organisers they actually wanted, kind of get folder structure ideas from them. We then set those up in the test system because the logic was they have access to the test system, they can go and see what we're setting up and check that it's actually what they want before we set it up in production, and then it's not actually helped the problem. So this is one of the new organisers that we set up. This was for our manufacturing team. So this is a CTD organiser, so Common Technical Document. We set this up actually with the CTD sections in the custom fields. So initially it took a little bit of work to paste those all in, but once that was done, all of the documents from that point that we uploaded could be given that bit of structure. And actually it's a very simple structure because they just click into it, they've got the products and they've got the area they're looking into, and actually that makes it quite easy for them to find the documents. Originally our manufacturing team had a much more complicated structure, so it also helped to show them when things were in the wrong place, because if you can see something's in the wrong section in 2 clicks, it's a lot easier than having to go through 5 clicks to get there. So to find out whether or not the initial changes we've made had actually made any difference, we repeated our survey. It was later in the year. We pretty much did exactly the same survey because the logic was then we could try and compare them to check if the things had been altered and see whether or not the day-to-day use of the system had improved. General feedback was good. It looked like we were on the right track. We'd had a lot more people again since the original survey, so actually we took it as a positive that it was going up even more because there were lots of new people. You'd think they might have quite negative attitudes, not knowing how to use the system quite that well, but it seemed to all be looking good. One of the comments we had on that was safe searches are a great help for some documents. So if people are making comments like that after the changes we've made, then they're good. It's showing that actually the effort we've put in was having some effect. We knew that not everything was fixed. But it gave us a few ideas for improvement. People had a better understanding of the system, they'd had more training, they could leave comments to say exactly where they were having problems rather than just leaving kind of vague remarks about not being able to find documents. Right, so we had some projects to try and turn around this negativity. This is after the second survey, a bit more information, we could try and pin down exactly what it was. That was the problem. We had some advanced training sessions to try and give people an idea of how to set up their own save searches, trying to give people more of an idea of navigating the system, because what we were doing initially was people would come into the company, they would get master control training, they'd get an overview of how to use the system along with everything else on their first day, and I think, to be honest, it was going a little bit over their head. And it was just to refresh that a bit, and also more of a classroom atmosphere, so they felt a bit more like they could ask questions. I think people are quite nervous on their first day if you're giving them a lot of information. People have been there a couple of weeks, they felt like they could ask the questions and discuss things. And it also gave us more ideas of where there were problems, because people would come out and say things in the training sessions that they wouldn't necessarily say in the survey. We did some data cleansing. I'll touch again on this in a bit, but trying to improve that metadata so that the organisers were accurate and people can actually find the documents. We also started doing some metrics out of our metadata, so having that data cleansing also helped that from our quality metrics perspective. We had an easy-to-use form for issues, so again, I'll mention this again in a second, but we put a form that people could download on the homepage so that they could actually go through and just easily tell us what was wrong. Drop-in workshops. Now, this is a bit of a touchy issue almost, because I'm sure it's the case in any company, but there's a huge range of IT skill. Some people are right up there, you know, really, really good knowledge. Some people, not so much. So there are some people that are always going to need more help than others. So we set up these drop-in workshops so people could come in, discuss their problems on a one-to-one basis, so that they didn't necessarily feel embarrassed in a group class, that it was actually not being able to find the organisers or something that they were having an issue with, not being able to do a red line on a task because they weren't sure where to click, just to try and get through those, and also feed it back into our original kind of new starter training, because it's the sort of thing that people probably need to know when they first start the company. We also have started doing quarterly updates on improvements. So one of the things that came out of the survey was that people weren't really sure what improvements were made to the system. We had actually been making a lot of improvements in the background, but they couldn't necessarily see them, they just felt the benefit. So the idea was have these quarterly updates, and then people can see what you've done, can see what's changed in the system. It's also a good platform for things like this, where I've come to the conference, I get lots of notes on good things that are coming with the new software or things I didn't realise I could do. I can then feed those back so people know what's coming, and it kind of gives them a more positive stage for that. Also another place for people to let us know if there are any issues, make them feel just generally more involved. As I mentioned, we did some data cleansing. This is actually something that was a bit of a throwback to my previous job, because when I worked in customer service, making sure your metadata was correct on things like customer addresses, customer names, was very, very important, because if you didn't know them, you couldn't bill them properly, you couldn't do the things properly that you were trying to do in your job. So I tried to bring some of that to our system to try and automate it slightly. As I mentioned, if the data isn't correct, the taxonomy organisers won't be used quite correctly. What I tried to do was correct it as soon as I saw it, but also identify trends. So if, for example, a particular document has been given the wrong subtype or the wrong custom field, try and make a note of that and work on that, because potentially that might be something QA need to work on as a team to try and get all those changed to make sure that they're right. Checking the custom data for our fundamental documents. So what I did was create some Excel lists of kind of formulas to check what the custom data would be, then pull the reports out of master control, and then I could do an automatic check of the custom data. So, for example, was the wrong study number being given to the wrong product? Quite straightforward things like that actually, especially if you had an inspection, doesn't look very good if things are appearing in the wrong place. The documents are there, they're fine, there's no issues with the documents really, they're just incorrectly categorised, which is making them look like they're in the wrong area of the system. So it takes a bit of time to set up those spreadsheets to start with, but actually once you've done it, you can just pull the data out monthly, check it, amend the data, carry on. So I started doing monthly routine checks on a number of different areas. So trying to roll these out across all the quality documents that we're now trying to use for our metrics, but also the kind of fundamental areas, so the manufacturing documents and our clinical documents, that kind of thing. So I mentioned previously we had a user-friendly form on the homepage. We just added it as a public link to everyone's homepage, just so it meant that if they were in the system, they didn't have to then go and find a shared log on a shared drive to go and put their comments in. Because I did try and use shared logs on shared drives, and it was like a tumbleweed of no one putting anything in there for months, and I'm sure they were having issues. So we put this here, it made it a lot more accessible. This is what the form looked like. So it was just an Excel form. You click the button, you downloaded it. Quite simple: name, date, the area, the suggestion of the issue. I personally didn't set this form up. It was my colleague, and what he's done is actually make it so that it's automatic. When you click the submit form, it sends an email to our document control main inbox so that we can just go in and correct the issue. Or if it's like an issue that's going to take longer to fix, we've got a tracker that we go and put that on, and then in our regular meetings we try and work on trying to fix some of those issues. It's also something we can pick up on our quarterly updates to let people know where we are with those problems. But it's good. We've had quite a few of these through already since we put it in, so it's definitely working better than the logs were to start with. So we had to move forward, adapt our ways of working to our new system. We have this great new improved system, the ability to do lots more things we couldn't do before. We had to make sure we implemented those so we were getting the full benefit. We tried to, where possible, incorporate the improved features into our processes. So, for example, e-signatures rather than wet signatures. Originally, when the system was first installed, people were quite wary of using e-signatures, weren't very comfortable with that. But now we've tried to introduce it for as many documents as possible. We do still have some documents that are wet signed, but the majority of our quality documents are now e-signatures, and actually it's gone the opposite way. People are very happy to e-sign things, especially now. We've got colleagues in the US and in different parts of Europe. It's a lot more straightforward for us. Our training files, originally people had paper kind of training records, and occasionally they would upload those PDF files to the system. So essentially the system was supposed to be a mirror image of their training files. What we did was completely take those training files away, archive what we had at our office, and treat the electronic copy as the master. So it meant that QA were then really in control of their training files. We had an organiser of everyone's training files so they could easily go and see exactly what was in there. Not as advanced as necessarily having the training module, but as we're quite a small company still at that point, it worked for us, for people to be able to go and see their qualifications and that kind of thing. We removed the reliance on a number of Excel logs. So, for example, logging quality issues with suppliers, change control, things like this, potentially were done on Excel logs. That was gone. People couldn't just accidentally delete rows on Excel logs, accidentally delete the log, move it to a different area of the shared drive, things like that. Those problems were removed. We could get the live data out to show, for example, how many quality issues have been raised in the last month, which was a huge step forward for us. We have started recording some of the data within the custom fields. As I said, we're quite a small company. We haven't got the process module yet. So for us, what we've started doing is recording, say, for example, you have a quality issue with the supplier. How many days is it taken for someone to receive that issue and raise it with QA? The number of days we record in our custom fields, and then we report that. Probably in an ideal world, not the best way of doing it, but for us it works right now because, as I said, we're still quite small. That's the sort of thing we can put in our custom fields and start to track our metrics, which was something we couldn't really do on the previous system. Or if you did, it was a lot of manual labour, a lot of hand cranking with Excel logs, and lots more stuff ongoing. Okay, so we're moving forward. We've made some changes to the system to try and make it that we're utilising all the features. How are we going to incorporate this we're going to have to rewrite our procedures. We're a regulated company. We've got SOPs on all of the tasks we're doing. If we're now incorporating e-signatures into some of those processes, the SOPs are going to have to be updated to reflect that. I think we could describe it as a step change from the old system. It was a lot of change. We tried to update the procedures as gradually as possible, update the processes as gradually as possible, just so people weren't, what are you doing? Got this new system and now you're forcing me to read all these SOPs as well. So we tried to do it gradually, but obviously we wanted to utilise the features of the new system as quickly as possible. What were the challenges of having to rewrite a lot of procedures? Consistency between procedures was one of the major issues. So even things like the terminology around doing things in master control, just making sure that was right was a bit of a challenge. And just rewriting lots of procedures at the same time, making sure they're consistent, can be quite difficult. Getting agreement on procedures from different parts of the company. I'm sure this is an issue at all companies, but especially at small companies, there are very few people involved. Getting all those people to agree can potentially be quite difficult, but we got there in the end. Understanding the functionality the new system had. So again, this harks back to the training we had to do, because we can't rewrite SOPs to include using routes or include using electronic signatures if people don't understand what those things are or the terminology that we're using is. So it's trying to get that in and potentially take a step back and say, as QA, we really want to push things forward and make sure we're using the functionality of the new system. But if we're forcing people to try and update their procedures and forcing people to try and move too quickly, it's actually just going to be met with a lot of resistance. So it was also knowing when to step back and say, okay, we'll go for a halfway house now, and then we know there's also that functionality there to update it later when we get to it. Take it a bit at a time. So, changing our procedures, changing our processes, then potentially meant our configuration, the setup of our master control, wasn't quite right for now what we were doing now. As the process and procedures changed, so did the system. Quite often we had to change the configuration of our system very slightly to be able to set up the new processes. So new routes, new custom fields, new reports. There was quite a lot of work with this, but it just meant that we could try and get those new procedures out as quickly as possible. Probably something people didn't really notice we were doing in the background again, but it just meant that we could get everything done very smoothly. And consistency between these things is sometimes quite difficult as well, because if you're creating a lot of new routes for new sign-offs to make things electronically signed, getting those consistent can be quite difficult. So what would we do differently if we were to do the whole thing again? So I think one of the key things would be more collaboration and communication, going out to more people in the company rather than just the managers and saying, what do you want from the new system? Because you've got to get all of their buy-in to be able to make them want to use the system. If you don't have that, all you have is the resistance that we then had later on. So getting that collaboration to start with is very important. Further organisers from the outset. Try and use organisers for as many things as possible, because that is what people are used to, especially with what sounds like is coming with the new versions. People are much more used to that. We actually put the organiser kind of button link on their homepage as well, so they didn't even have to try and find where the organisers were. They could just click that and it would go straight through. On some people, we actually set their homepage as the organisers, so they could just go straight through to them. They were set up there for them. Training given to suit different usage and IT skills. I think we were giving quite a blanket training to start with, partly because we were quite small. We needed to give more specialist training to people that were going to be doing more specialist things. If people were going to be signing off a lot of documents, then they need to have more training on how to use the routes, how to do red lines, how to work with a rejection collaboration, those kind of things, because otherwise we're just going to have to do it for them later. Appreciating people have different IT skills. Not everyone is necessarily going to understand all the things I'm saying, so trying to simplify those things because they don't have the knowledge of the system, and potentially using things like the PDF reports rather than the Excel ones, because even where I created templates in Excel for some of the reports we were using, people were still struggling with that. So making things as user-friendly as possible, as few clicks as possible. We probably should have put more thought into the trending and the tracking that we're now doing with our metadata. I mean, to be honest, it's not the way the documents alone is supposed to be used, but for us, it's working right now. So thinking, could we put a custom field in there to track, for example, the number of days it takes us to sign off an audit report, the number of days it takes for a supplier to send us an audit report back. If we'd have thought about that logically to start with, we could have included that much sooner. Whereas now we're having to go back and add things in, try and make them work, which can be a little bit more difficult later on. So, future. As I said, we're still expanding, different countries, different time zones, trying to train people across the globe. There are some thoughts to filming potentially parts of our training so that people can see those in the US, and making bite-sized chunks of things, for example, how to go and use an organiser so people can just click into our intranet and go and do that. Things like that to try and make things easier if I'm not potentially in the office, because someone's in the office in Massachusetts or wherever, it makes it a lot more straightforward. We are potentially outgrowing the use of just a document management system, looking at potentially increased functionality in the future. We are getting much more constructive feedback and positivity surrounding the system. When I first started, even the management team weren't that positive around the system that they'd just purchased or just bought the use of, and now they're much more positive, getting much more positive feedback. Their understanding of the system is a lot better. They're actually coming and asking us for things which they just didn't necessarily know existed before, and it just means we can really get that involvement going, and a lot of the quality things are improving because of that. People are becoming much more interested in, for example, what quality issues they're getting with suppliers, how long it's taking to deal with them, because they can now get that information which they couldn't have before. We need to maintain the ongoing projects. We've got to keep them going, improving our ways of working, because otherwise it will just stagnate and we'll get back to the same problem we had before with all the resistance. So trying to keep everything rolling, keep the ideas coming. And yeah, that's it from me. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask me at all? No?
One question about
sure.
Just,
yeah.
How do you find using the custom fields, or difficulties using the custom fields in putting up your organizer?
In the taxonomy ones? Setting them up originally, or actually once they start going originally? Quite straightforward. You just choose the custom fields that you want to be included in the organiser. With the newer ones, what we've tried to do is use as few custom fields as possible, and then check how they work, and then add more custom fields as you go on, because it just makes it look a bit nicer.
How do you manage the problem with only having one value
in the custom field? Like they were saying yesterday, with some things we've had to do this and put something in brackets. So, for example, a supplier's name changed, formally so-and-so, that kind of thing. But hopefully moving forward with the multi-custom fields, that will make that a lot easier. Do you want a question?
Yeah. Are you generating the documents then in the CTD module in there with master control with the documents module, or are these already finalized documents that you post and then in the organizer?
It depends. Some of the documents generated internally, but because we don't have any manufacturing on site, it's more just things like specifications and that kind of thing. A lot of the documents are generated by our suppliers, and then we receive them, scan them in, and then upload them to our system, keep them there. Cool. No questions? Brilliant. Cheers.